My topic report is about fraud auditing, and it's in the chapter 11 of our textbook, Auditing and Assurance. I choose this topic because it's the role of the auditor to investigate the evidence, like a financial statement, and to come up with a reasonable assurance that it's free from material misstatements, either due to fraud or error. And let me start by defining the meaning of the word fraud. Fraud here, according to ISA, that's the International Standard of Audits, it says that fraud is an intentional act by one or more individuals among management, those charged with governance, employees, or third parties, involving the use of deception to obtain an unjust or illegal advantage. So here, according to ISA, in fraud there is a deception. And when we say fraud, it's not only the entity, not only the management, the client, even the third party could be involved in fraud of a business. To understand the meaning of fraud even more, we're going to differentiate fraud from error, also by providing some examples. So, what's the difference between error and fraud? When we say error, it means unintentional. There is no element of deception. You are not aware that there is a misstatement to financial statement. So that's the meaning of error, unintentional. For example, you overlook an evidence, you have a wrong misjudgment, you have a miscalculation, for example, on financial statement, and misapplication. How about fraud? Fraud is intentional, like for example, theft. If you are stealing resources from a business, corruption. If you are bribing the regulators or higher officials in return for a benefits, or you're bribing gift in exchange of promotions, etc. Manipulation. For example, you are changing the evidence, and misrepresentation, it means you are providing false information. So that's the difference of error to fraud. The key difference is the intention. So before we discuss about auditor's responsibility, let us discuss who is responsible and accountable if there's a fraud in one entity. So here, management is responsible for identifying and measuring fraud risk, taking steps to mitigate identified risk, and monitoring internal controls that prevent and detect fraud. So, the management or the board committees should be responsible for prevention and detection of fraud, and not the auditor. The management is ultimately responsible for preventing and detecting the fraud. So, how can the management prevent and detect fraud? They can do this through identifying and measuring fraud risk, mitigate identified risk, and monitoring fraud prevention programs and control. I made an analogy about these prevention steps by the management. It's like an antivirus. You're going to filter and scan your computer for the virus, and then once you identify it, you're going to quarantine it. It means giving control, then afterwards, you're going to kill the virus. That's how I represented the management's steps how to prevent and detect fraud or control fraud rather.